his actual words to the arresting officers while he was being processed, according to CNN, was, "Is it in the news?"
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In 15 years, 18 people were found or disappeared on Gilgo Beach. That's potentially an average of more than one murder a year for 15 consecutive years. Thus far, the remains of 9 women, a man and a toddler have been found. According to the New York Times, quote, Amber Lynn Costello, Megan Waterman, and Melissa Bartholomew, all 3 of their bodies were found wrapped in hunting camouflage burlap within a quarter mile of each other on a stretch of beach along Ocean Parkway. All had been in their 20s, petite, and working as escorts. They disappeared between 2009 and 2010. A woman has recently come forward who recalls a bone-chilling encounter with the prime suspect in the Long Island serial killer case. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. I also want to recommend to those who are new to the channel, who haven't paid any attention to the submersible coverage, just watch one episode. I think you'll find that very interesting as well. If you're really enjoying this episode, you can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. Now, according to the New York Post, a woman, an anonymous woman, she does not want to be named, she says that she drove Rex Hauerman home one time because she actually relocated to Long Island, and so they were going along a route that was pretty dark and desolate. In that drive, they had a conversation about the murders, and the first thing he said to her was, "I don't know why he would use a burlap net." And she was like, "I don't know either." Do you mind if I try to answer that? I mean, it's obvious in hindsight, he uses burlap because the killer is also an experienced hunter. He's an avid hunter. That's part of his identity. So reverse engineering the burlap found with all 3 victims, all escorts, all relatively close to one another, all in the general area of the beach, suggests you're dealing with a local hunter who has an unusually keen interest in hunting. And if that's the case, he probably has a collection of hunting weapons, in other words, guns. And of course, he does. And if you just take that idea, well, we might be dealing with someone with an unusual interest in hunting. And if you think about what is a serial killer, you use that definition. What is the definition of a serial killer? Well, it's someone with an unusual interest in hunting people. Practically speaking, he's using the burlap to avoid or delay detection of human remains in this case for as long as possible. He's using camouflage to hide and also contain evidence. This is something he's learned from hunting. And this suggests a killer who isn't a vagrant or a vagabond. He's not an opportunistic person passing through the area. He's not an itinerant individual, but rather someone who lives in the area. Also, someone who's meticulous, someone who perhaps behaves in a pattern, someone who tends to do something in a repetitive way or even an OCD way, right? And also someone who has got the resources to discard relatively expensive burlap. I think it's about $20 a piece, instead of, say, using the staple disposable container that we see so often in true crime, cheap black plastic bags. Of course, if you happen to be in a car with Hauerman and he was talking to you about what do you think about this case, and you're driving through the area at night, basically his hunting grounds, you might want to keep some of those thoughts to yourself. You might want to be careful saying certain things, but imagine if this anonymous woman had said, you know, the killer is probably a hunter. He's probably a guy who's really into hunting. And if he's really into hunting, maybe he's got a lot of guns. Can you imagine the look on his face if she'd said that? Perhaps she could have added, by the way, do you hunt? What do you think the answer is? What do you think the answer is? Do you think Rex Hauerman hunts? Do you think he's an avid hunter? But I think there are other reasons he asked her about it. I think he was taunting her in his own twisted way. He was also enjoying his sense of power and agency. Remember, this is his domain. He's enjoying his knowledge and mastery. And, in a sense of, I know something that you don't. And perhaps in a general sense, also trying to intuit what people thought about him, thought about this person that they didn't know had committed these crimes. How often when he was with women did he imagine doing to them what he'd done to his other victims? In this analysis, I want to start rolling out the carpet to motive. We've already touched on motive in previous episodes on this channel, but we want to get a stronger grip on it when we take that bull by the horns. What does hunting tell us about the specific character we're dealing with? Does the hunting and all it entails, the hunting of animals, translate to the hunting of human beings? Also, what does the large amount of weapons tell us about the psychology of this particular hunter? These are important questions to bear in mind, but for now, we'll keep them in the back of our minds. First, I want to deal with the number one clue we all missed, and it's this. No, it's not so much the house on 105 First Avenue, Massapequa Park, but that this is firstly the house Rex Heuermann grew up in. It's not just any house, it's the house he grew up in. And secondly, this is the home of a prominent Manhattan-based architect. It's those two things together. Why would an architect choose to live in such a nondescript, dilapidated house when he was known for his meticulous, inspired, concept-driven designs? I mean, just look at the mismatch between his house and his web design. What you're seeing is once again the allegory of the public face versus the private face. Heuermann's house is low-key by design. It's meant to be a place you simply don't notice, a place where people can disappear to. Much of the house is obscured by the fabric of leaves, trees, bushes, and branches. And part of the number one clue we all missed is a question. I don't know what the answer is, but the question, when the suspect met with and apprehended and assaulted his victims, where did this take place? If his wife was out of town, where did these encounters take place? Did it take place in a car? Did it take place outdoors? Or did it take place in this very house? And is that how his wife's hairs got onto the victims? You can also imagine that the lair of a killer like this who's doing things in a repeated fashion would be a place that he would be not only very familiar with, but a place he would feel very comfortable inside. It would also give him, a controlled environment like this would give him an extended time to do his nefarious deeds. Does that make sense? So this dwelling may have played a very important role, not only in the execution of one crime, but in the execution of several. And when he uses it successfully in one, maybe he wants to use it repeatedly in others. Think about it. Much of the house is obscured by the fabric of leaves, trees, bushes, and branches. These effectively work as a sort of a curtain against line of sight from people in the surrounding homes and neighborhood. I don't think it's any surprise that sometimes when neighbors saw Heuermann, what was he doing? Well, he was chopping wood. And that is because the front of the house is meant to present a harmless front. But the number one clue we all missed isn't so much the house or what it looks like, although that's part of it. It's more the psychology of remaining rooted to the past in some way. And I think staying in this house is an allegory. It's this physical manifestation of a psychological manifestation. In other words, it's a physical rootedness that represents, that symbolizes a psychological rootedness, and maybe a better word for that is stuckness. There's a Japanese proverb that goes, if you love your son, make him leave home. This is a cautionary tale, albeit an extreme one, of sons who not only fail to leave home, but ultimately never leave. Bear in mind, Heuermann's brother is living in another state far, far away. The one brother does leave and goes and lives somewhere else. The other one doesn't. Ironically, when Heuermann was arrested on July 13th, it wasn't in his sorry excuse for a house. They arrested him in Manhattan instead. The reason, well, you probably know, they didn't want to risk taking on Howerman and that arsenal of weapons. Is that why Howerman accumulated such an arsenal? To take on the cops if it eventually came to that? To go out with a bang in a blaze of glory? Whatever the answer is to that, the enormous weapons cache, I think, played another role, which has to do with his psychology, and which we'll be dealing with in the number 2 clue we all missed. Before concluding, I just want to pause on this idea of someone squatting in a particular property where he certainly had the means either to upscale or to live somewhere else. Incidentally, when he brought someone in to do a little upscaling of the interiors, there were certain rooms he expressly told the designer were off limits. But also, he had access to properties not just beyond Gilgo Beach, but far beyond in other states. So again, why does he remain rooted to 105 First Avenue? Well, because in a very real sense, the skeletons he's left littering the area, and I'm speculating in this regard, allegedly left in the area, perhaps he feels he's got to monitor them and manage them and perhaps maintain a certain level of custody over. It's the Gilgo Beach version of the Delphi case, where you hide in plain sight and you're the average man and thus the invisible man. But the psychology of remaining rooted to the past in some way that we see related to human remains is also an allegory for a man who is rooted to the past in some other way. He's rooted to his own past. Which part of his past? And so the real issue here is someone who is ultimately stuck in the past. This is someone who's trying to exorcise the demons of the past, and someone referred to him as a demon. I find that quite interesting because that is essentially what's going on here. Someone who's trying to exorcise demons, and he perhaps becomes a demon in the process. He's trying to exorcise the demons of the past, his past. And how does he do that? By inflicting it on others. And yes, he takes sadistic pleasure in it. And here's another example of him taking pleasure in this whole process. And we heard this today from a former escort who had dinner with the accused Gilgo Beach serial killer, Rex Howerman. She said that he got off talking about the victims and seemed to be gleefully talking about the murders. She even said that although he seemed totally normal in the beginning and he talked about his job, later on, when he spoke about the murders, she got a sense, she kind of got an inkling that he was visualizing it in his head, and almost as though he was talking about it from experience. And worse than that, he was getting off to what he was saying. And you almost get the sense that he's constantly looking into the past, remembering what happened, but in a way that makes him feel good. Why does he need to feel good? Where does this feeling come from? Of needing to feel that glee, needing to get off on something. What is that to compensate for? And bear in mind, what we're talking about is a scenario where this person allegedly has an encounter with someone, and in his own version of that encounter permanently wins some sort of struggle, and then there's a mystery surrounding that in which he's the only one who knows about that. And so every time he has one of these encounters and he remembers it, he remembers his feelings of agency, potency, power, and at the expense of the other person. Why do you think he needs to feel these feelings? This escort also said that she's a felon and she had a history and she didn't want to get involved with the cops, so that is why she didn't tell them, even though her sixth senses, her spidey senses were going all over the place. She was seeing red flags all over. She said, I think he went after girls who were addicts or had a record, or anyone less likely to talk to the police. I think so too. But there's also another reason why most or all of his encounters with women are with hookers. Why do you think that is? And that brings us to the number 2 clue we all missed. And I'll be dealing with that in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.